The morning air at Fort Carson's elite sniper range hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and cordite, stirred by a restless Colorado breeze. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of amber and gray, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain where a group of the military's finest marksmen gathered. They were the best of the best, drawn from covert units whose names never graced official records. Colonel Marcus Hale, a man whose weathered face bore the weight of decades in special operations, stood before them, his steel-gray eyes scanning the line of hardened faces. Today's exercise was no ordinary drill. It was a test of the impossible. At 3,200 meters, a solitary target stood defiant against the horizon, its silhouette barely discernible through the haze of distance and shifting winds. The wind flags along the range danced erratically, their movements a chaotic symphony of gusts that mocked any attempt at precision. Hale's voice crackled through a megaphone, sharp and unyielding. "This target is beyond reason," he declared. "It's not about hitting it. It's about knowing when the shot's not yours to take. Understand your limits, gentlemen." In the background, unnoticed by the gathered elite, a woman moved quietly among the equipment crates. Lena Voss, early 30s, with sharp hazel eyes and dark hair tied back in a practical bun, wore the plain fatigues of a logistics officer. Her badge swung from a lanyard, marking her as support staff, someone to count bullets, not fire them. She blended into the scene like a shadow, her clipboard a constant companion as she jotted down notes, her gaze flicking to the wind flags with a precision no one else seemed to notice. The snipers, clad in tactical gear and brimming with confidence, exchanged smirks. "Waste of ammo," muttered one, a grizzled Army Ranger named Sergeant Caleb Warwick, his voice carrying just enough for his peers to chuckle. Warwick was a legend, with a kill count whispered about in hushed tones across bases from Kandahar to Mosul. He stepped to the firing line first, his custom Barrett M82 rifle gleaming under the morning sun. "Watch this, rookies," he called, his tone laced with swagger as he adjusted his scope. "Winds at 10 to 12 knots, left to right. Humidity 62%. Pressure steady at 29.9. Lena's pen paused over her clipboard, her eyes narrowing as Warwick ran through his calculations. Her fingers twitched, as if tracing invisible patterns in the air. Warwick fired, the crack of his rifle splitting the silence. Through spotting scopes, the round was seen kicking up dust a full 3 meters wide of the target. He stood, unfazed, addressing the younger snipers. "That's physics for you. No one's hitting that. Too many variables." One by one, the others tried and failed. A Delta Force operator came closest, his shot landing 1.9 meters off-center, earning a nod from Hale. "Best of the morning," the colonel noted, but still not operational. The snipers grumbled, some blaming the wind, others their scopes. Lena moved silently among them, her presence as unremarkable as the crates she inventoried. "Who's the clerk?" a young Marine whispered to his buddy, jerking his chin toward her. "Probably some bean counter tracking our misses," came the reply, followed by a snort. "Bet she's never touched a rifle." As the morning wore on, the target remained untouched, a silent taunt to their skill. During a break, the men clustered in groups, swapping war stories and debating ballistic coefficients. Lena slipped away to a storage shed, her absence unnoticed. She returned moments later, her expression as blank as ever, her clipboard still in hand. The exercise resumed under a climbing sun, the air growing warmer, the winds more unpredictable. Warwick took another shot, spending nearly 20 minutes on his adjustments. His bullet landed 1.6 meters off, closer, but still a miss. "That's the limit," he declared, dusting off his knees. "No tech we've got can bridge that gap." Hale nodded, his face grim. "Learn this now. Some shots aren't meant to be taken. Save your rounds for what's possible." The snipers murmured agreement, their egos bruised but their resolve intact. Lena, standing near a stack of ammo crates, glanced at the wind flags again, her lips moving slightly as if whispering to herself. No one paid her any mind. As the day neared its end, Hale checked his roster. Last shooter, Captain Ellison. Where is he? A staff sergeant piped up. Called to HQ, sir. Urgent briefing. Hale frowned but nodded. Fine. That wraps today's exercise. Tomorrow, we'll analyze the data, and a deafening crack cut him off, reverberating across the range like thunder. The target, untouched all day, shattered in a perfect center hit, fragments exploding outward in a cloud of dust. Silence gripped the range, then chaos erupted. Who fired? Hale roared, his calm shattered. Who discharged without orders? The snipers exchanged bewildered glances, their rifles cold. Range officers scrambled, checking logs, confirming positions. Through their scopes, they saw the impossible. A dead center bullseye at 3,200 meters. Check the west ridge, Warwick barked, grabbing a scope. Someone's screwing with us. Security radioed back. No breaches, no unauthorized personnel. A young corporal hesitated, then pointed toward the equipment area. Sir, I saw her. The logistics woman. She was near the shed when the shot hit. All eyes turned to Lena, who stood calmly by the crates, her clipboard held loosely at her side, her face betraying nothing. Hale stormed over, his boots kicking up dust. Ma'am, did you fire a weapon on my range without authorization? Yes, sir, Lena replied, her voice soft but steady, barely audible over the stunned murmurs. Laughter broke out, sharp and disbelieving. No way, Warwick scoffed, stepping forward. That shot's impossible with standard gear. What did you use, lady? M24, serial number 44792. Rack C, Lena answered, naming a standard-issue sniper rifle. The laughter grew until Hale silenced it with a glare. This isn't a game, he snapped, then turned back to her. Your credentials, now. Lena handed over her ID, her movements deliberate. Hale studied it, and his expression shifted. Shock, then something like reverence. He straightened, almost snapping to attention. Gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying a new weight. This is Major Lena Voss, formerly of Project Wraith. The name sparked recognition among the older operators. A Green Beret muttered something to his neighbor, who let out a low whistle. The Yemen job? Another whispered. 3 shots, 3 kills, 3 miles out, through a dust storm. That was her. Hale handed back her ID with care. Major, I wasn't briefed on your presence. By design, Colonel, Lena said, meeting his gaze. Her voice, though quiet, held an edge of steel. Project Wraith was decommissioned 4 years ago. I was reassigned to logistics. I prefer it that way. Warwick, his earlier scorn replaced by curiosity, stepped closer. That shot, wind, spindrift, Coriolis, it shouldn't be possible. What am I missing? Lena paused, then answered, You're not factoring in barrel vibration harmonics, localized air density shifts, or thermal gradients affecting bullet spin. The terms silenced the crowd, her quiet expertise reshaping their perception of the unassuming clerk. The snipers stood frozen, their eyes locked on Lena Voss, the logistics clerk who had just shattered their understanding of what was possible. The Fort Carson range, bathed in the fading light of a Colorado afternoon, felt charged with a new kind of tension, not the arrogance of the morning, but a humbling awe. Colonel Marcus Hale, still gripping Lena's credentials, gestured toward her worn notebook. Major, I'd like to see those calculations. They're not on paper, Lena replied, her voice calm but unyielding. They're in my head. Always have been. A murmur rippled through the group, a mix of disbelief and reluctant respect. Sergeant Caleb Warwick, the grizzled ranger who had led the morning's efforts, shook his head. Nobody does atmospheric density shifts in their head, he said, his tone caught between skepticism and admiration. Before anyone could respond, a new figure emerged from the direction of the base's command post. Commander Nathan Cole, Naval Intelligence, strode across the range with the purposeful gait of a man accustomed to cutting through bureaucracy. His pressed uniform stood out against the dust-covered snipers, and his arrival drew raised eyebrows. "Colonel Hale," he greeted, his voice clipped. "I wasn't here to observe. I was waiting. For this." He turned to Lena, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You couldn't resist, could you, Major?" Lena's expression remained neutral. "The exercise was built on a flawed premise, sir. Someone had to correct it." Cole's smile widened, but it carried an edge. Always teaching. "Gentlemen," he addressed the group, "what you saw wasn't luck. Major Voss holds the classified record for the longest confirmed kill shot. Beyond your clearance, but trust me, it's real." The snipers shifted, their earlier dismissals now a source of quiet shame. A senior SEAL muttered to his teammate, "Project Wraith, thought that was just a ghost story." Cole's eyes flicked to him. "It was real until funding dried up and politics killed it 4 years ago." He turned back to Lena. "Major Voss was its cornerstone. First a shooter, then its lead instructor. 31 confirmed kills beyond 3,000 meters. 0 misses." A young Delta operator, his curiosity outweighing his embarrassment, stepped forward. "But how? Standard gear? Those conditions? It's not possible." Lena glanced at Cole, who gave a slight nod. She moved to a nearby whiteboard, wiping away the day's failed equations with a swift motion. Her marker moved with surgical precision, sketching out a web of formulas that made the sniper's calculations look elementary. "You're accounting for wind and humidity," she said, circling their standard variables. "But you're missing microclimatic layers and barrel resonance effects." For 15 minutes, she dismantled their training with quiet authority. She described how to read the subtle ripples in the air, the way heat rising from the earth could betray wind patterns, how the faint hum of a rifle's barrel could be factored into a shot. "You're all looking at the target," she finished, setting down the marker. "But precision comes from seeing what's invisible." Warwick, studying the board, rubbed his jaw. "Why logistics, Major? With skills like that, you could have been anywhere." A shadow crossed Lena's face, her hazel eyes darkening. "Some missions leave scars," she said carefully. "I needed distance." Cole's voice softened, a rare break in his composure. "Yemen, 4 years ago. It's declassified for this group, Major. You don't need to shield them." The snipers leaned in, sensing a story that carried weight. Cole continued. "A high-value target in Sana'a, orchestrating attacks on coalition forces. The window was tight. 8 minutes, surrounded by civilians, in a dust storm that grounded our drones." A Marine interrupted, his voice low with awe. 3 miles out. Through that? You had spotters?" Lena shook her head. "No. Visibility was near 0. I used weather data and predictive modeling." 3 shots, Cole added. 3 kills, the target and his 2 lieutenants. No civilian casualties." Warwick's eyes narrowed. "But something went wrong." Lena's jaw tightened, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "The intel was bad," she said flatly. "The lieutenants were his sons, barely 16. Armed, yes. Part of his network, yes, but still kids. My math was flawless. The intelligence wasn't." A heavy silence settled over the range. These men, hardened by years of combat, understood the cost of such errors. Hale broke the quiet. "So you hid in logistics. Until today?" Lena met his gaze. "I didn't plan to step forward, but hearing you all talk about impossible shots when I knew better, it got under my skin." Cole checked his watch. "Colonel, I need Major Voss for a debrief. Then she should rest. It's been a long day." As Lena gathered her notebook, the snipers watched her with new eyes. The woman they'd ignored all morning now stood as a legend made flesh. Some looked away, chastened by their earlier mockery. Others stared, piecing together fragments of rumors they'd heard about Project Wraith. As the group dispersed, Warwick lingered, his voice low. "I told you Wraith was real," he muttered to a teammate. The younger man shook his head. Yeah, but you said it was a squad of Delta guys, not a logistics clerk who looks like she's grading math homework. Warwick chuckled softly. That's the trick, isn't it? The best ghosts are the ones you never see coming. In her sparse quarters that evening, Lena sat alone, the dim light of a single lamp casting shadows across the room. A faded photo of a desert canyon hung on the wall, next to a dog-eared copy of Epictetus's Discourses. On her nightstand rested a small cedar box, its surface etched with angular patterns. A knock broke her reverie. Cole entered, uninvited, and took the room's only chair. "Quite a show today," he said, his tone equal parts admiration and warning. "You're back on the radar now, Lena. People above my pay grade are talking." "I didn't sign up for that," she replied, her voice firm. "I handle supply chains, not operations." Cole leaned forward. "That was your choice, not a contract. We need you back. The program's being revived." Lena's eyes hardened. "Without me." Cole shook his head. "We lost 2 operatives this year. Kiev, Bogota, missions you'd have handled blindfolded." "I'm sorry," Lena said, her voice softening but resolute. "But I'm done with the field." Cole sighed. "Not the field. Training. These new recruits. They're good, but they don't see the way you do." Lena stared at the cedar box, her fingers brushing its edge. Inside lay a single .308 casing, polished to a mirror sheen, a relic of the shot that had defined and broken her career. 4 years of fading into the background, undone by a moment of pride. Now the consequences were closing in. The dawn broke crisp over Fort Carson, the first light slicing through the mist that clung to the Colorado foothills. The sniper range buzzed with a quiet intensity, the air thick with anticipation. Major Lena Voss stood at the edge of the firing line, her silhouette unassuming against the sprawling terrain, yet every sniper in attendance stood at attention as she approached. The events of the previous day had transformed her from an invisible clerk to a figure of near-mythic reverence. Colonel Marcus Hale waited for her, his weathered face betraying a rare hint of deference. "Major Voss," he greeted, his voice steady but formal. "Orders came through last night. Project Wraith is being reactivated. They want you leading the training." Lena's hazel eyes flickered, her expression a carefully guarded mask. She had anticipated this after Commander Cole's visit, but the weight of it still settled like a stone in her chest. "I walked away from that life, Colonel," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the morning breeze. Hale's gaze softened, a rare crack in his stoic demeanor. "Some gifts aren't meant to stay buried, Major. These men need what you know." The snipers stood in a loose semicircle, their rifles slung or cradled, their eyes fixed on her. Among them was Sergeant Caleb Warwick, the once arrogant ranger whose skepticism had given way to respect. He stepped forward, holding out his prized spotting scope, a custom Zeiss with engravings from his years in the field. "Major," he said, his voice carrying across the silent range. "Whatever happened in Yemen, we've all got ghosts. But what you did yesterday, that wasn't just a shot." It was a masterclass. The gesture was profound. Among snipers, personal optics were sacred, as much a part of their identity as their rifles. For Warwick to offer his was an act of humility, a recognition of her mastery. Lena took the scope, its weight familiar in her hands, and studied the faces around her. Young, weathered, eager. Faces not unlike those she'd trained before Yemen, before the weight of a single shot had driven her into the shadows. She nodded, a decision crystallizing. "First rule," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "Forget everything you think you know about impossible shots." A ripple of relief passed through the group. Hale's lips twitched in what might have been a smile before his stern mask returned. "We've set up the North Training Annex," he said. "Classrooms, simulators, and a 1,200-meter range for live fire." Lena shook her head. No classrooms, Colonel. Marksmanship lives in the dirt, in the wind, in the fading light. Give me the men, their rifles, and open terrain. Hale raised an eyebrow but nodded. As you say, Major. Where do we start? Lena scanned the group. Who came closest yesterday? A lean young sniper, barely in his mid-20s, raised his hand hesitantly. I was 1.7 meters off, ma'am. Specialist Jonas Creed, 10th Mountain Division. Lena's eyes locked on him. Creed, grab your rifle, firing line. Everyone else, observe from 5 meters back. No talking. Creed hustled to retrieve his M24, moving with the efficiency of someone molded by relentless training. Lena knelt beside him as he settled into position, the same 3,200-meter target looming in the distance. Fire when ready, she instructed. Creed went through his routine, checking wind flags, adjusting his scope, muttering calculations under his breath. His shot cracked through the morning air, landing 1.6 meters off-center. Better, Lena noted, her tone neutral. Now ditch the math. Creed blinked, confused. Ma'am? Lena's voice was firm but patient. Your formulas are chaining you. Feel the shot, don't think it. His brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. Close your eyes, she said. Tell me what you feel. Creed obeyed, his voice halting. The ground's cold. The rifle's weight on my shoulder. A breeze on my neck. Lena pressed deeper. Is the breeze steady? Does it shift? Where's it coming from? For several minutes, she guided him through an exercise that felt alien to his training. The other snipers watched, their curiosity piqued as Creed's breathing slowed, his body attuning to the subtle pulse of the environment. Now open your eyes, Lena said. Fire when it feels right. Not when you think it's right. Creed hesitated, then settled into his rifle. He waited, still as stone, for nearly a minute before making a slight adjustment and firing. The spotting scopes revealed a hit just 0.3 meters from center, a leap forward. Creed turned to her, wide-eyed. How? Lena's response was simple. You stopped wrestling the world and moved with it. Ballistics are the foundation, but precision comes from sensing what others ignore. For the rest of the morning, she worked with each sniper, guiding them through sensory drills that rewrote their instincts. By noon, every man had tightened their groupings, some by margins that seemed impossible. Warwick, the veteran, cut his error by nearly 70%, his face a mask of focused awe. As the group broke for lunch, Hale approached Lena, a file folder in hand. Major, your reassignment's official. Your special training advisor, reporting to me. Logistics duties are off your plate. Lena nodded, a mix of resolve and unease settling in her gut. After 4 years of fading into obscurity, stepping back into the spotlight felt like stepping onto a tightrope. One more thing, Hale added, handing her the folder. New recruit arriving tomorrow. Nora Kane, 23, former Olympic biathlete, exceptional scores, but she's struggling with standard protocols. Instructors say she's too slight for long-range recoil. Lena flipped open the file. Nora Kane, 5'3", 120 pounds, with a competitive record showing uncanny focus and breath control. Size doesn't matter, Lena said, closing the folder. Technique does. I'll take her myself. Hale nodded, a spark of approval in his eyes. I figured you'd say that. The months that followed were a blur of transformation. Under Lena's guidance, Fort Carson's sniper program evolved. Meditation became as critical as marksmanship drills. Sensory awareness exercises reshaped how the snipers saw the world. Accuracy rates climbed across all ranges, and word of the program's success spread, drawing interest from allied forces. On a blustery autumn morning, Hale observed a new class from a distance, watching Lena's original students now teaching her methods to fresh recruits. At the far end of the range, Lena worked with Nora Kane. The young biathlete, with her wiry frame and quiet intensity, had defied every expectation. Where others saw her small stature as a weakness, Lena saw potential. "Precision isn't muscle," Lena told her, adjusting Nora's grip on an M110. "It's vision." Nora nodded, her breath steady as she prepared for a 2,900-meter shot under gusty conditions. She moved through Lena's drills with a dancer's grace, her focus unshakable. When she fired, the round struck dead center, a feat that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Hale lowered his spotting scope, a rare smile breaking through. On his desk back at headquarters sat a classified photo of Project Wraith's final team, most faces redacted. Only now did he grasp why Lena had buried herself in logistics, why she'd chosen to vanish. Sometimes the greatest talents thrived in the dark, unnoticed until they chose to step into the light. The Fort Carson range lay under a gray autumn sky, the wind carrying a bite that hinted at winter's approach. Lena Voss stood at the edge of the training field, her breath visible in the chilly air as she addressed her advanced students, a tight-knit group that included Sergeant Caleb Warwick, Specialist Jonas Creed, and the rising star, Nora Kane. The program, now whispered about in military circles as the New Wraith, had transformed under her guidance. Accuracy rates had soared, and her unconventional methods, meditation, sensory drills, an almost intuitive connection to the environment, had turned elite snipers into something more. Today, she announced, would push them further. "Environmental extremes," she said, her voice cutting through the morning quiet. "Desert simulation this morning, Arctic this afternoon. Gear up." The snipers dispersed to prepare, their movements purposeful, their respect for Lena palpable. 6 months ago, they had dismissed her as a clerk. Now, they hung on her every word. As the group scattered, Commander Nathan Cole approached, accompanied by a man in a tailored charcoal suit, his sharp features and clipped stride marking him as an outsider to the dusty world of the range. "Major Voss," Cole said, his tone formal but laced with an undercurrent of urgency. "This is Daniel Warwick from Langley. He'd like a moment." Lena's shoulders tensed, a reflex honed by years of navigating the intelligence community's shadow games. She met the man's gaze, noting the way his eyes assessed her, not with the skepticism of the snipers, but with the cold calculation of someone who saw people as assets. "Major," Warwick began, his voice smooth and precise, "your program's results are exceptional. Accuracy improvements alone have justified the funding 10 times over." "Thank you," Lena replied, her tone cautious, sensing the pivot coming. Warwick didn't disappoint. "We have a situation in Uzbekistan, a credible threat to regional stability. We need your expertise." Lena's eyes narrowed. "My expertise or my trigger finger?" Warwick's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Consultation for now. Your perspective could save lives." Lena glanced across the range, where Nora Kane was checking her rifle with the quiet focus that had become her hallmark. The young biathlete caught her eye and offered a small nod, a gesture of trust that stirred something in Lena, a memory of her own early days, when skill and purpose had felt inseparable. "Consultation only," Lena said firmly to Warwick. "I don't shoot anymore." "Understood," Warwick replied, his tone too smooth to trust. "Briefings at 0700 tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving Cole lingering. The commander studied Lena for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You knew this was coming," he said quietly. Lena nodded, her gaze drifting to the distant target range, where she'd revealed herself 6 months earlier. "I did. But it's on my terms now." Cole's eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You've changed, Lena. 6 months ago, you'd have shut the door entirely." She considered this, her fingers brushing the cedar box in her pocket, where the polished .308 casing lay, a reminder of Yemen, of the shot that had broken her faith in her own precision. 6 months ago, I was running," she said. Now I'm choosing. The distinction was subtle but seismic, a reclamation of control she'd thought lost forever. As the day unfolded, Lena led her students through grueling simulations. The desert scenario baked the range in artificial heat, the air shimmering with distortion. She taught them to read the mirage like waves, to feel the subtle shifts in temperature that could bend a bullet's path. Nora, small but relentless, adapted with a speed that surprised even Lena, her shots landing consistently within half a meter of center. In the Arctic simulation, with fans blasting icy air and simulated snow obscuring visibility, Jonas Creed applied Lena's sensory drills, cutting his error margin by half. Warwick, the veteran, watched with a quiet intensity, his respect for Lena now bordering on reverence. By evening, the group gathered for a debriefing, their faces flushed from the day's challenges. Lena stood before them, her clipboard long abandoned, her authority no longer questioned. "You're starting to see," she told them. "Not just the target, but the world around it. That's where the shot lives." The snipers nodded, their notebooks filled with observations that went beyond ballistics. Notes on the texture of the wind, the rhythm of heat rising from the ground. As the session ended, Colonel Hale approached, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "Major, your methods are rewriting the playbook. We've got requests from Allied forces, UK, Canada, even Israel, wanting to observe." Lena nodded, unsurprised but wary. The spotlight was growing, and with it, the pull of the world she'd left behind. "There's something else," Hale added, lowering his voice. "Warwick's briefing tomorrow. It's not just consultation. They're pushing for your involvement in Uzbekistan. I thought you should know." Lena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you, Colonel. I'll handle it." Hale nodded, then hesitated. "You've given these men something rare, Major. Not just skill, but perspective. Whatever you decide, they'll follow your lead." He walked away, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the range in hues of fire and shadow. In her quarters that night, Lena opened the cedar box, the .308 casing catching the lamplight. She held it, its weight a tether to the past. Yemen had been her crucible, 3 perfect shots, 3 lives ended, and a truth she couldn't unlearn. No amount of precision could undo bad intelligence. She'd buried herself in logistics to escape, but teaching had rekindled something she hadn't expected. A sense of purpose, not in taking shots, but in shaping those who would. The next morning, she arrived at the briefing room, a stark space with fluorescent lights and a long table cluttered with maps and laptops. Warwick sat at the head, flanked by Cole and 2 other suits whose credentials screamed high-level clearance. The air was thick with unspoken expectations. "Major Voss," Warwick began, sliding a dossier across the table. "We have a high-value target in Tashkent, linked to a network planning attacks on U.S. assets. The window's narrow and the conditions are brutal. High winds, urban clutter. Your insight could make the difference." Lena flipped through the dossier, her eyes scanning satellite images and meteorological data. The numbers were familiar, the patterns second nature. She could see the shot in her mind, 3,400 meters, crosswinds at 15 knots, a maze of rooftops. But she saw something else, too. The faces of the boys in Yemen, caught in her crosshairs because of someone else's mistake. "I'll analyze the data," she said, her voice firm. "I'll give you a profile for the shot, wind, density, harmonics, but I'm not taking it." Warwick leaned back, his expression unreadable. "We're not asking you to. Yet." Cole shot him a glance but said nothing. Lena closed the dossier. "I trained snipers, not operatives. That's the deal." Warwick nodded, but his eyes betrayed a calculation that set her on edge. "Of course, Major. Your input is enough. For now." As she left the room, Lena felt the weight of the moment. She'd drawn a line, But the world she'd left behind was closing in, its pull as relentless as the wind on the range. Outside, Nora Kane was waiting, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her eyes bright with the quiet confidence Lena had nurtured. "Ma'am," Nora said, "we're ready for the next drill. Just tell us where to start." Lena looked at her, seeing not just a student, but a reflection of her younger self. Before the doubts, before the ghosts. "Back to the range," she said. "We've got work to do." The Fort Carson Range glowed under the soft light of a late autumn afternoon, the Colorado peaks casting jagged shadows across the valley. Major Lena Voss stood at the firing line, her hazel eyes scanning the horizon, where a new target stood at 3,000 meters. A challenge, but no longer the impossible barrier it had been 6 months ago. Her students, now a honed unit of precision and instinct, moved with quiet purpose around her. Nora Kane, the former Olympic biathlete, adjusted her M110 with the fluid grace of someone who had internalized Lena's teachings. Specialist Jonas Creed checked wind flags, his movements less mechanical now, guided by a sensitivity to the air's subtle rhythms. Even Sergeant Caleb Warwick, the grizzled veteran, had shed his old arrogance, his shots tighter than ever under Lena's guidance. The past 6 months had reshaped Fort Carson's sniper program into something extraordinary. Lena's methods, blending sensory awareness, meditation, and an almost uncanny understanding of environmental nuances, had turned elite marksmen into artists of their craft. Accuracy rates had climbed to levels that drew whispers from Pentagon brass and foreign allies alike. Yet for Lena, the victory was bittersweet. The briefing with Daniel Warwick from Langley that morning lingered like a storm cloud. Uzbekistan, a high-value target, a shot only she could blueprint. She'd agreed to consult, but the pressure to return to the field was mounting, a pull she felt in every glance from Commander Nathan Cole. As the day's training wound down, Lena gathered her core group, Warwick, Creed, and Kane, for a final debrief. The wind had picked up, tugging at their fatigues, carrying the sharp scent of pine and gunpowder. "Tomorrow we push to 3,500 meters, she announced, her voice steady but carrying an edge of challenge. "You're ready, but only if you trust what you feel, not just what you calculate." The snipers nodded, their respect for her absolute. Nora, her dark hair escaping her cap in wisps, spoke up. "Ma'am, that shot you made 6 months ago, 3,200 meters, dead center. Can you teach us that?" Lena's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You're already on the path, Kane. It's not about the shot. It's about seeing what no one else does." As the group dispersed, Colonel Marcus Hale approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Major, your work's making waves. We've got a NATO delegation arriving next week to observe. They're calling it the Voss method." Lena's jaw tightened. The spotlight was growing brighter, and with it, the risk of being pulled back into the world she'd left. "There's more," Hale added, his tone cautious. "Warwick from Langley's pushing hard. He's got approval to expand your role beyond training. They want you in Tashkent, not just for consultation." Lena's fingers brushed the cedar box in her pocket, the .308 casing inside a silent reminder of Yemen, of the cost of perfection. "I told them no shots," she said, her voice low but firm. Hale nodded, his eyes searching hers. "I know. But they're not asking, Major. They're maneuvering. Be ready." He turned away, leaving her to face the lengthening shadows alone. That evening, in her sparse quarters, Lena sat on the edge of her bed, the cedar box open in her hands. The casing gleamed under the lamplight, its polished surface reflecting fragments of her past. Yemen had been her pinnacle and her undoing. 3 shots, 3 kills, and a truth she couldn't escape. Her precision had ended the lives of 2 boys, armed but still children, because of flawed intelligence. She'd buried herself in logistics to atone, to hide. Teaching had brought her back, But now the world was knocking again, demanding the skills she'd tried to lock away. A knock at her door broke the silence. Commander Cole entered, his face etched with the weight of unspoken orders. "Lena," he said, dropping the formalities. "They're not going to let this go. Tashkent's escalating. They need someone who can make the impossible possible." Lena set the casing back in its box, closing it with a soft click. "I gave them my analysis," she said. "The shot's viable. Someone else can take it." Cole shook his head. "No one else can. Not like you." "I'm not that person anymore," she said, her voice steady but laced with an old pain. Cole leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You never stopped being her. You just stopped trusting her. These kids, Kane, Creed, Warwick, they're better because of you. But the world doesn't stop turning because you want it to." Lena met his gaze, unflinching. "I choose what I do now, Nathan. Not Langley. Not you." Cole stood, his expression a mix of frustration and respect. "They'll push harder tomorrow. Be ready." He left, the door closing softly behind him. Lena stared at the photo of the desert canyon on her wall, its stark beauty a reminder of places where she'd once thrived, and faltered. She hadn't slept much that night, but when morning came, her mind was sharp, her resolve ironclad. At the range, the NATO observers arrived, their uniforms a patchwork of allied nations. Lena ignored their scrutiny, focusing on her students. Nora Kane, now her star pupil, prepared for a 3,500-meter shot under brutal crosswinds. Lena knelt beside her, guiding her through the sensory drills that had become second nature. "Feel the gusts," Lena murmured. "They're not random. There's a rhythm. Find it." Nora nodded, her breath slow and deliberate. When she fired, the round struck within 0.2 meters of center, a shot that drew gasps from the observers. Warwick, watching through his scope, let out a low whistle. "She's you, Major," he said, half joking but with a trace of awe. Lena didn't respond, but the comparison struck deep. Nora's focus, her ability to adapt, mirrored Lena's own at that age. Before Yemen, before the weight of lives taken. The training session ended with the team's best performance yet, their shots clustering tighter than any standard program could achieve. As the observers left, buzzing with excitement, Daniel Warwick from Langley reappeared, his suit pristine despite the dust. "Major Voss," he said, his tone clipped. "Tashkent's window is closing. We need you on a plane tomorrow." "Consultation?" "Yes, but also to oversee the operation." Lena's eyes hardened. "I gave you the profile. Train someone else." Warwick's smile was thin, calculated. "No one else can execute it. Not in time. You know that?" Lena glanced at her students, now packing their gear, their trust in her absolute. She saw Nora, young and fierce, carrying the potential she'd once had.